She stood in the rain outside the glass tower, clutching an envelope that could destroy him. Inside, Alexander Kane pressed his hand against the window 50 floors above, watching the only woman who ever made him feel human walk away. They said he was untouchable, the billionaire CEO who crushed empires without mercy. But tonight, his empire was crumbling, and the cleaning woman he loved held the choice that could save him or end everything. The question is, how did the most powerful man in the city fall for the woman no one else saw? If you enjoy emotional stories like this, like the video and subscribe, and let's go back to where it all began. Alexander Kane owned the skyline. Not metaphorically. Literally. 17 of the 40 tallest buildings in the city bore his signature on the deed. When he walked into a boardroom, conversations didn't just pause, they died mid-sentence. Executives straightened their spines. Assistants double-checked files they'd already checked 3 times. Competitors heard his name and reconsidered their strategies. He'd built his empire on precision, on control, on the understanding that emotions were liabilities and attachments were weaknesses that other men indulged in and paid for later. At 38, he'd dismantled more companies than most people would work for in a lifetime. He made decisions that affected thousands of lives before most people finished their morning coffee. His penthouse sat on the 63rd floor of Kane Tower, a glass and steel monument to everything he'd conquered. Floor-to-ceiling windows overlooked a city that never stopped moving, but inside, silence pressed against the walls like something physical. No photographs lined the shelves. No personal items cluttered the surfaces. His assistant, Jennifer Moss, had worked for him for 6 years and had never seen him receive a personal phone call. Not one. His calendar lived in 6-minute intervals. Jennifer scheduled his life with military precision. 8:42 to 8:48, review quarterly projections. 8:48 to 8:54, approve or deny acquisition terms. 8:54 to 9 o'clock, strategic planning. Every minute accounted for. Every second maximized. Sleep was scheduled. Meals were functional. Even his rare moments of exercise happened on a treadmill in his office while he reviewed contracts. People called him brilliant, visionary, ruthless. What they didn't call him was human. Late one Thursday night, Alexander stood at his office window, the city glittering 47 floors below. It was past midnight. Most of the building sat dark and empty. He'd sent Jennifer home hours ago, though she'd protested, worried about tomorrow's merger presentation. He'd assured her he had it handled. He always did. He turned from the window, intending to review the file one more time, when something caught his eye. His desk. The surface gleamed under the overhead lights, but that wasn't unusual. What was unusual was how it gleamed. The wood seemed warmer somehow. Richer. He moved closer, running his hand across the surface. Not a single streak. Not a fingerprint or smudge. Even the grain of the wood seemed more pronounced, as if someone had taken the time to understand how the light should hit it. He glanced at his coffee cup from earlier, now sitting clean and empty on the credenza, positioned exactly where he always placed it. His desk calendar had been straightened. The pens in their holder faced the same direction. Someone had been here. Someone who cared about details the way he cared about details. For the first time in years, Alexander Kane found himself wondering about a person he'd never met. Maya Brooks clocked in at Kane Tower every night at 10 p.m. By 10:03, she'd changed into her work clothes, pulled her hair back, and started her route on the 32nd floor. By 2 a.m., if everything went smoothly, she'd finish the executive levels and head to her second job across town. By 6 a.m., she'd be stocking shelves at a grocery store in her neighborhood. By noon, she'd finally make it home, check on her mother, sleep for 4 hours, then start again. The math was simple. 3 jobs equaled enough to cover her mother's medical bills, rent, and groceries. Barely. The medications alone cost more than most people's car payments. The hospital had been patient, but patience had limits, and those limits came with payment plan adjustments that Maya read in the dim light of her phone at 3 a.m. when she couldn't sleep. At Kane Tower, she moved through the building like smoke. Executives passed her in hallways without adjusting their phone conversations. Security guards nodded when she signed in, but 2 weeks later couldn't recall her name if asked. She understood. She wore the same Navy uniform as 12 other cleaners on the night shift. She kept her head down, did her work, collected her paycheck. But Maya noticed things other people missed. The ficus tree on the 43rd floor that nobody watered, its leaves browning at the edges. She started carrying a water bottle, giving it a drink each night. The crooked picture frame in the conference room on 39 that had hung at an angle for 3 weeks. She straightened it. The young intern's desk on 42, buried under files and coffee cups, a half-written resignation letter visible in the trash. Maya left a note on a post-it. Tomorrow might be better. You've got this. She did these things because her mother had taught her that kindness didn't require an audience. That the smallest gestures mattered most when nobody was watching. That being invisible didn't mean being useless. Thursday night, Maya ran behind schedule. A spill on 38 had taken longer than expected. By the time she reached the executive floor, it was nearly 1 a.m. She moved quickly, efficiently, her cart wheels barely making a sound on the polished floors. Alexander Kane's office sat at the end of the hall, his name etched in silver letters on the dark wood door. Maya had cleaned it dozens of times. Always empty. Always locked. Tonight, the door stood slightly ajar, a sliver of light cutting across the hallway carpet. She hesitated. Protocol said to skip any occupied offices, come back later. But later meant staying past 2 a.m., and she couldn't miss her next shift. She knocked softly. Silence. She knocked again. Nothing. Maya pushed the door open slowly and stepped inside. He stood at the window, his back to her, silhouetted against the city lights. Then he turned. Alexander Kane stared directly at her, and Maya's heart stopped. Most people looked away when Alexander Kane noticed them. Eyes dropped. Shoulders tensed. Apologies tumbled out in stuttered fragments, each word carefully chosen to minimize damage, to escape quickly, to survive the encounter. Maya Brooks looked right at him. "I'm so sorry," she said, and her voice carried something Alexander hadn't heard in years. Warmth. Not the calculated warmth of people who wanted something from him, but the genuine kind that came naturally, the way sunlight came through windows. "I knocked twice. I thought the office was empty." She didn't fidget, didn't look for an escape route. Just stood there in her Navy cleaning uniform, yellow gloves still on her hands, a bottle of wood polish visible in her cart behind her. "It's after 1 in the morning." His voice came out harder than he'd intended. "Why are you here?" "I work here." Simple. Matter of fact. As if it were the most obvious thing in the world. "Night cleaning shift. I'm running a bit behind tonight, so I took a chance that you'd already gone home. Most people would leave an occupied office and come back later. Most people don't have another job starting at 2:30 a.m. She smiled, but it wasn't apologetic. Just honest. "I'll come back tomorrow if that works better for you." Alexander studied her. Really looked at her. Mid-20s, probably. Hair pulled back in a practical bun. No makeup. Tired eyes that still managed to be kind. She didn't know who he was. Or if she did, she didn't care in the way others cared. "What's your name?" "Maya. Maya Brooks." She gestured toward the door. "I should let you get back to work. Sorry again for interrupting. You're working 3 jobs." It wasn't a question, but she answered anyway. 3.5 if you count the weekend gig. My mom needs medications that insurance doesn't quite cover. So, she shrugged, like it was just another fact of life, no different than weather or traffic. "That's why you're here so late. That's why I'm here at all." She paused at the door, glancing back. "Your desk will still be here tomorrow, Mr. Kane. And so will I." She knew his name, had known the whole time, but it hadn't changed the way she spoke to him, hadn't added that careful edge everyone else used. The door closed softly behind her. Her cart wheels squeaked slightly as she moved down the hallway, fading into the building's ambient hum. Alexander stood motionless for several seconds, then walked to his desk and sat down. The merger file sat where he'd left it, but the words blurred together. He tried to refocus. Failed. Tried again. 20 minutes passed before he realized he was still sitting in the dark, replaying a 2-minute conversation, trying to identify the strange feeling settling in his chest like something he'd forgotten existed. Alexander started staying late on Friday. Then Monday. By Wednesday, Jennifer stopped asking if he needed anything before she left for the evening. By the following week, she'd simply accepted that her boss had developed new working hours that coincided, somehow, with the building's quietest shift. He told himself it was productivity. Fewer distractions. No phone calls. No impromptu meetings. Just him and the work that never seemed to end. But his eyes drifted to the glass walls of his office more than they should have, tracking movement in the hallway. The subtle glow of the cleaning cart's small work light. The efficient pattern of someone who'd perfected their route. On Thursday morning, he caught Jennifer between meetings. "The night cleaning staff," he said, keeping his tone casual. "How long have they worked here?" Jennifer blinked, clearly not expecting the question. "I'd have to check with building services." "Is there a problem?" "No. Just curious about turnover rates. Employee retention." She pulled up the information within an hour. 12 people on the night crew. Turnover averaged 60% annually. High stress, low pay, difficult hours. One name stood out in the report, Maya Brooks. 2 years. 0 absences. 0 complaints. 0 disciplinary issues. Perfect attendance for 24 months straight. Alexander closed the file and didn't explain why he'd asked. That evening, he left his coffee cup on his desk. Half full, the way he always abandoned it when a call ran long or a document demanded attention. He could have poured it out, taken it to the break room. Instead, he left it exactly where it sat and went home earlier than he had in weeks. The next morning, the cup waited on his credenza. Clean. Dry. Positioned precisely where he normally kept it. But next to it sat something that made him stop mid-step. A small origami crane, no bigger than his thumb, folded from what looked like a note card. The paper was pale blue. The creases were sharp, exact, the kind that required patience and practice. He picked it up carefully, turning it in his palm. Light. Delicate. Impossibly detailed for something so small. At 10 a.m., he sat in a conference room across from investors who wanted to discuss a merger worth $47 million. They talked numbers. Projections. Market share. Risk assessment. Alexander heard all of it, processed all of it, but his hand stayed in his pocket, fingers curved around a paper bird that probably cost nothing and somehow felt priceless. Halfway through the presentation, when the lead investor made a joke about quarterly returns, Alexander smiled. Not the controlled expression he used to signal approval. Not the sharp smile that preceded a calculated move. Just a smile. Small. Real. The first one in 10 years that had nothing to do with winning. The changes started small enough that Maya almost missed them. Her schedule shifted first. Instead of splitting her shift between floors 32 through 47, she found herself assigned exclusively to the executive level. Fewer floors meant finishing earlier, which meant making it to her second job without running. When she asked her supervisor about it, he shrugged and said something about efficiency adjustments. 2 weeks later, her paycheck showed an increase. Not massive, but enough to notice. Enough to matter. She went to HR, certain it was a mistake, already dreading the conversation about having to pay it back. The woman behind the desk pulled up her file and smiled. Cost of living adjustment, she said. Standard annual review. But I've only been here 2 years. The reviews happen at 3. Policy changed. The woman's tone suggested the conversation was over. Consider yourself lucky. Maya didn't feel lucky. She felt confused. But she also needed the money, so she didn't push. The call from her mother's hospital came on a Tuesday afternoon, waking Maya from the 4 hours of sleep she managed between shifts. The billing coordinator sounded almost cheerful. "We've reviewed your mother's account," she said. "We can offer a new payment plan. $50 a month. No interest." Maya sat up in bed, suddenly wide awake. "That's not possible. The medication costs alone are 8 times that." We've enrolled her in a pharmaceutical assistance program. The foundation covers most of the cost. You're responsible for the copay. What foundation? Papers rustled on the other end. The documentation just says Charitable Medical Fund. Are you interested in the payment plan or not? Maya said yes before the woman could change her mind. That evening, she thanked everyone she could think of. Her supervisor, who claimed he had nothing to do with anything. The HR representative, who looked genuinely confused. Even the security guard at the front desk, who just nodded and said he was glad things were working out. From his office, Alexander watched the security feed. Watched Maya stop 3 different people in the hallway, her face bright with gratitude they didn't deserve. Each thank you made something twist in his chest, unfamiliar and uncomfortable and strangely satisfying all at once. When Robert Chun from operations proposed cutting the cleaning contract to save money, Alexander listened to exactly 45 seconds of the presentation before standing up. "You're fired," he said. Chun blinked. "Sir, you heard me. Effective immediately. HR will be in touch about severance." "But I don't understand. What did I?" "This meeting is over." Alexander had him escorted out by 3 p.m. Officially, it was due to insubordination and failure to meet performance standards. The paperwork Jennifer prepared made it look legitimate. 3 days later, Maya opened her locker in the employee break room and found an envelope. Inside was a check for $6,000. No name, no note, just numbers that represented 2 months of breathing room. She stood in the empty hallway and cried, shoulders shaking, hands covering her face. The kind of tears that came from exhaustion and relief and disbelief all tangled together. In his office, Alexander watched the feed. His jaw clenched. His hand formed a fist on his desk. He told himself this was enough. That he'd done what needed doing. That he could stop now. He knew he was lying. The photograph ran in 3 tabloids by 7 a.m. Alexander Kane and an unidentified woman leaving his building at dawn. The angle made it look intimate. His hand near her back, though he'd never touched her. Her face turned toward him, caught mid-smile at something he'd said about the sunrise. The headline wrote itself. Ice King melts? Billionaire CEO's mystery woman. Maya's phone started ringing before she'd even seen it. Coworkers she barely knew. Friends from her other jobs. Her mother, voice tight with concern. By the time Maya found the article online, it had been shared 2,000 times. She'd run into Alexander in the lobby that morning, both of them leaving around 5 a.m. They'd walked to the door together. Talked for maybe 3 minutes about nothing important. The weather. The early morning quiet. He'd almost smiled when she mentioned the origami crane had taken her 15 tries to get right. That was it. 3 minutes that looked like something they weren't. At Kane Tower that evening, the shift supervisor called her into his office before she could clock in. He didn't meet her eyes. "I'm sorry, Maya. I really am. But corporates made the decision. We have to let you go." "For what?" "I didn't do anything. You're in a photograph with Alexander Kane. That's enough." He slid an envelope across the desk. 2 weeks severance. It's more than we usually give, but someone upstairs approved it. Maya's hands shook as she packed her locker. The other cleaners watched from a distance, whispering behind their hands. Nobody offered to help. Nobody said goodbye. The security guard who used to nod at her when she signed in now stared at his computer screen like she didn't exist. Her mother met her at the door when she got home, newspaper already open to the photo. "Maya, baby, who is that man? What's going on?" "Nothing's going on, Mama. I promise. It's just a misunderstanding." "Then why are you crying?" Maya hadn't realized she was. Across the city, Alexander sat at the head of the boardroom table while 8 men in suits told him exactly what he needed to do. Gerald Morrison, the board chairman, led the charge. A simple statement. You don't know her, she was an employee, there's nothing to the story. Clean and decisive. Kills the narrative before it spreads. She lost her job today, Alexander said quietly. That's unfortunate, but not your concern. Your reputation is what matters here. The Kane name means something. It means strength. Control. Not, Morrison gestured vaguely, Whatever this looks like. What if I don't make a statement? The room went silent. Then you're telling the world that the rumors might be true, Morrison said. And that weakness will cost us investors, partnerships, deals. Everything you've built. Maya sat on a park bench 3 blocks from her apartment, her final paycheck and a cardboard box of belongings beside her. The sun was setting. Her phone kept buzzing with messages she couldn't bring herself to read. Alexander stood at the window of the boardroom, his reflection ghost-like in the glass. Behind him, 8 men waited for an answer that would either prove he was still the man they feared or reveal something they could never respect. The city stretched out before him, indifferent and vast. Somewhere in it, Maya was trying to figure out how to survive what knowing him had cost her. He turned to face the board. Alexander didn't finish his sentence. Mid-word, mid-thought, he simply stood up and walked out of the boardroom. Behind him, 8 voices erupted at once, but he was already in the hallway, already moving toward the elevator. "Mr. Kane!" Jennifer sprinted after him, heels clicking against marble. "Sir, you can't just leave. They're waiting for an answer." "Mr. Kane!" The elevator doors closed on her confused face. His phone started ringing before he reached the lobby. Morrison. Then 2 other board members. Then investors who'd somehow already heard. Alexander silenced it and kept walking. His driver stood beside the town car at the curb, but Alexander waved him off and climbed into his personal car instead. A black sedan he'd bought 3 years ago and driven maybe twice. He sat behind the wheel for 10 seconds, hands gripping the leather, before he realized he didn't know where he was going. Her address wasn't in any file he could access. Not legally. Not quickly. It took 3 phone calls. One to a private investigator he'd used for corporate due diligence. One to an assistant at the hospital billing department who owed him a favor. One to a contact who asked no questions and provided the information in under 5 minutes. Alexander drove himself through the city for the first time in 4 years. Traffic. Stop lights. Lane changes. Things other people dealt with every day that he'd forgotten existed. His hands shook slightly on the wheel. Maya's apartment building sat in a neighborhood he'd never had reason to visit. Old brick. Fire escapes. Small shops on the ground floor. He parked illegally and didn't care. She wasn't home. A neighbor getting mail mentioned the hospital. Her mother's name. The room number came from the same source as her address, and Alexander didn't let himself think about what he was doing or why as he drove across town. St. Catherine's Hospital. 4th floor. Room 417. He found it with the efficiency that had built his empire, but when he reached the doorway, momentum abandoned him. Through the small window, he could see Maya sitting beside a hospital bed. Her mother lay propped up on pillows, eyes closed but smiling. Maya held a book in her lap, reading aloud. Her voice carried through the door, soft and steady, something about gardens and summer, and a character named Elizabeth. This was her life. Modest. Exhausted. Beautiful in a way his penthouse had never been. This was what his silence had destroyed. Alexander pushed the door open. 3 faces turned toward him. Maya's mother, confused. A nurse checking vitals, startled. And Maya, whose expression moved through surprise, recognition, and landed on something he couldn't read. He said her name. Just that. Maya. Not an explanation. Not an apology. Just her name, spoken the way someone might say the only word that mattered in a language they were still learning. The room held its breath. So did he. Maya stepped into the hallway, leaving her mother with the nurse. Alexander followed, his presence filling the narrow hospital corridor in a way that made 2 orderlies stop and stare. "I can get you your job back," he said. No preamble. No small talk. Better than that. A position in my office. Executive level. Healthcare coverage for your mother. Full benefits. Whatever you need. Maya crossed her arms. Not defensive. Just tired. "Why are you here, Mr. Kane?" "Alexander. And I'm here because you lost your job because of me." "No. You're here because you feel guilty." "That's not the same thing." She leaned against the wall, studying him in the harsh fluorescent light. "You could have stopped this. One statement. One phone call. You have that kind of power. But you hid. So I need to know why you're here now. The truth sat in his throat like something with edges. He'd negotiated billion-dollar deals with less anxiety than this moment required. I spent 20 years building walls, he said finally, making sure nobody got close enough to matter. Then you walked into my office one night and somehow got through them without even trying. You left paper cranes on my desk and watered plants nobody else noticed, and made me remember that there's supposed to be more to life than winning. He paused. I don't know how to be the man you deserve, but I want to learn. And I'm done hiding. Maya's eyes glistened. You're sure? Because this isn't a business deal you can renegotiate if it gets complicated. My life is complicated. My mom is sick. I work 3 jobs. I live in a 1-bedroom apartment with furniture from thrift stores. Your world and mine don't exactly overlap. Then I'll learn to live in yours. She laughed, but it came out wet. You don't know what you're saying. I know exactly what I'm saying. The nurse poked her head out. Your mother's asking for you, honey. Maya nodded, then looked back at Alexander. Come meet her. If you're serious, she should know who you are. The introduction lasted 20 minutes. Maya's mother, Helen, asked more questions in that time than his entire board had asked in 10 years. What were his intentions? Did he understand what her daughter had been through? Could he promise not to hurt her? Alexander answered every question honestly. No performance. No calculation. Just truth. When they left the hospital an hour later, photographers were waiting. Someone had tipped them off. Cameras flashed as Alexander took Maya's hand, his fingers lacing through hers naturally, like they'd done it 1,000 times before. The photo appeared in every major business publication by morning. Alexander Kane, Billionaire CEO, holding hands with Maya Brooks outside her apartment building. No denial. No statement. Just the image itself, unambiguous and deliberate. His phone became unusable within an hour. Text messages. Voicemails. Emails. Morrison sent a 3-paragraph resignation letter. 4 other board members followed. Investors demanded explanations. Competitors smelled blood in the water. Maya sat on her couch, watching him scroll through message after message, watching his empire react to his choice. Alexander, she said softly, are you sure? He set the phone down, crossed the small living room, pulled her to her feet. Outside, a photographer still lingered on the street corner. Alexander didn't care. He kissed her forehead, gentle and deliberate, in full view of the camera and the world, and anyone who wanted to question what mattered more. 6 months changed everything and nothing. Kane Tower still dominated the skyline. Alexander still made decisions that affected thousands of lives. But the decisions themselves had shifted in ways that quarterly reports couldn't quite capture. The cleaning staff got raises. Real ones, not token adjustments. Transparent contracts replaced the labyrinth of fine print that had kept wages low and benefits minimal. Healthcare coverage extended to part-time workers. The company cafeteria started staying open for night shift employees, serving hot meals instead of vending machine dinners. When a reporter asked Alexander about the changes, he'd simply said, I was looking at the numbers wrong. The Helen Brooks Foundation launched in March. A nonprofit for working families struggling with medical debt. Anonymous at first, until someone leaked that Alexander Kane had personally funded the entire first year. The foundation paid for medications, negotiated hospital bills, connected families with resources they didn't know existed. Maya ran it, not as a figurehead, but as the director who showed up every day, learned every detail, fought for every family the way she'd once fought for her mother. Alexander watched her transform boardrooms full of hospital administrators and pharmaceutical executives, her quiet strength more effective than any aggression he'd ever wielded. She worked beside him now, not as an employee, not as an accessory, as a partner whose insights reshaped how he understood success. She saw people where he'd only seen numbers. She asked questions about impact that his business training had never taught him to consider. On a Thursday evening in late summer, they stood on the rooftop of Kane Tower. The same rooftop where he'd once lived alone in a glass fortress. Now Maya's hand rested in his, her thumb tracing absent circles on his palm. The city sprawled beneath them, lights flickering on as dusk settled. Thousands of lives, each one its own complicated story. "Do you miss it?" Maya asked. Being feared. Being untouchable. Alexander pulled her closer, her back against his chest, his arms wrapping around her waist. "I spent my whole life being untouchable," he said quietly. "You taught me that being held is better." She leaned into him, and they stood there as the sky darkened, two people who'd found each other in the space between who they'd been and who they were becoming. He'd lost half his board. 3 major investors. Competitors who'd once respected him now called him soft. His company's stock had dipped, then recovered, then stabilized at a new normal. But Maya watered the plants in his office every Tuesday. Left origami cranes on his desk when he worked too late. Kissed him good morning in front of employees who no longer whispered about it. Made him laugh at things that had nothing to do with victory. She'd walked through his walls without trying. He'd chosen her over everything he'd built. They'd both changed each other by refusing to look away. The city lights glittered below them, indifferent and eternal. Somewhere in those lights, other people were making impossible choices. Other lives were colliding in ways that would reshape everything. Alexander tightened his arms around Maya and thought about the paper crane he still kept in his desk drawer. About the night a cleaning woman had looked at him without fear. About the moment he'd realized that power meant nothing if you had nobody to share it with. "What would you risk?" Maya whispered, reading his thoughts the way she always seemed to. "For the person who sees you." He didn't answer with words, just held her closer as the stars appeared overhead, as the city breathed beneath them, as their story continued in the quiet space between heartbeats. Some empires were built on fear. This one, Alexander had learned, was being rebuilt on something far more powerful. Love that refused to hide. Truth that cost everything. 2 people who chose each other when choosing would have been easier to walk away. The skyline stretched endlessly before them. Behind them, Kane Tower stood tall, its windows now warm with light instead of cold with isolation. And on the rooftop where it all began, Alexander Kane held Maya Brooks and finally understood what it meant to be touched.